Welcome to the Recover You podcast. I'm Kylene.
And I'm Patrick.
We are a couple in recovery
From sex addiction
and betrayal trauma. Together, we share our story to encourage you on your journey. It's here that we talk about sex addiction, betrayal trauma, mental, emotional, and physical health, faith, and anything and everything needed to recover you to your most authentic self that God created you to be. Welcome, Patrick.
Welcome, Kylene.
To this episode of Recover You.
I guess we should welcome Coco, too, because she's lying in the little bed down there. Welcome, Coco.
Welcome, Coco Bean. No BB today.
No, she's tired upstairs somewhere.
Yeah. All right. And welcome to everyone listening in your car or while you're cleaning the house or doing your laundry.
In a train.
Maybe at work.
On a boat.
We're glad you're here today. So today, what are we going to talk about, Patrick?
We're going to answer some questions.
Yeah, well, sort of. They're not maybe exactly specifically worded questions that people have submitted, but situations that have come up or questions that have come up sort of generalized. One of the things, as we go along and we record episodes and we talk about recovery for the addict and recovery for the betrayed partner and very clear steps, there is always this space where there are different scenarios, things that are maybe less common or a little more unique and
more complex,
much more complex. And so today we're going to address and discuss some of the potential more complex issues that can come into this process. And I will read those in forms of questions. Sound good?
Am I supposed to respond to them in the form of a question, like Jeopardy?
No. So one of the things, we always want to preface really everything with, we encourage you to work with your own practitioners that are really niched and specialized in these areas. And specifically today, I think within these questions, we may be able to provide some thoughts, some feedback, some context, but certainly, again, especially because these are a little more complex, we may not hit everything that is specific to your situation.
Right.
So, yes, but we still hope it's helpful. So let's start with, what if the betrayed partner has also struggled with an addiction, maybe in another form? So usually when we're talking about recovery, we make it sound very clear-cut, right? There is a perpetrator, someone who has done the hurting and the betraying, and a victim, someone who has been wounded, right? Now that still can absolutely be true, but when we have situations where the betrayed partner maybe has also had their own addiction, and maybe it's in a different form, maybe it's alcohol or maybe it's food or, just a different format, then we're dealing with something that all of a sudden becomes much more complex. Because in a way, I want to clarify, it is a little bit different because with pornography and sex addiction and affairs, we specifically have that piece to it that feels very personal.
There's a relational component.
Oh, there's a sexual component, there's a relational component, there's an intimacy component. And I think the way we talk about addiction in terms of, the trauma model versus the disease model, I really believe that applies to any form of addiction, that we really want to look at the underlying emotions, that we really want to look at the root, why we choose, food to increase our dopamine, why we choose alcohol to increase our dopamine, why we, whatever it is. And so that I think is the same, but I think the impact on the partners can be different in terms of, it's betrayal in a different sense. It doesn't always fall into the category of infidelity, right? And so that can hit a betrayed partner a little differently. But when we're talking about recovery, so we have one person that's like a sex or pornography addict or who has an affair, and then maybe another, the betrayed partner, the person that's really wounded in that area, maybe has also engaged in their own addictive patterns in some other area. It adds a little bit of complexity because now we're dealing with two people that for sure need to go through the same process in terms of their own individual recovery, right? But then there might be more complexity in terms of the wounding on both sides. So whereas the person who has the pornography pornography addiction may be really wounded in some ways by living with an addict in a different form, the person that has been betrayed through pornography or infidelity can also be very hurt, and maybe slightly in a more personal way. But I think what I'm trying to say is like there's similar wounding now on both sides because it's not as clear cut.
Yeah. Oh,
I'm going to pause for your thoughts.
All right. So I was thinking about our own process. You certainly had you didn't have an addiction, but you had some wounds coming in, and through the process of healing from betrayal, you worked through a lot of those wounds as well. So I think that as you talk about this, I think this is why it's so important to get a coach, group, therapist involved on both sides as you're navigating through this. Sometimes people will say, well, I engaged in this behavior because I was unattracted because, let's say, she or he had a food addiction, right? And they were heavier. It's like, well, that doesn't justify it. It may have been frustrating and hard to deal with, right? Let's say there was like I don't know. I mean, a lot of times addictions come with denial. People don't really recognize how bad it is. Those are like consistent themes behind a lot of addiction. And so that can be really hurtful to the family. It's like I always feel like if we were sitting on a podcast with two people that wrestled with alcohol addiction, right? Betrayal wasn't there. I bet you really hear a lot of the same themes, the hurt, the deep woundedness, the manipulation, the lying, you know what I mean? Like all of those things would certainly come in. I think you're right in the sense of there is a letting your guard down or a relational component that, the infidelity piece that doesn't exist in alcohol addiction. But I think, if you were to ask somebody who was married to an alcoholic, I bet the massive amount of hurt and distrust. And
well, then you have communication issues that are coming in. Sometimes with alcoholism or drug use, there can be a lot of mood swings that can come in. I mean, probably with any addiction. You actually see that with pornography addiction, I think, when it really escalates and becomes really deeply problematic. People will have anger outbursts and stuff like that. So you tend to see that through addictive patterns in general. But regardless of what the addiction is, it's going to have a wounding effect on the other partner. So I think what makes this particular idea a little more complex is the betrayed partner is betrayed because there's been infidelity and there's a lot of personal wounding on that side, but then they're also going to, at the same time, have to take responsibility for their addictive behaviors, their emotional patterns, and whatever impact that has had on their betrayed partner. So it shifts a little bit, whereas like when a lot of times what we're talking about is somewhat in betrayed partners that are individually, like they don't have addictions, they're just kind of living their life, and we're usually talking about them being like shocked and just so out of the realm of like their awareness with like addiction or pornography or anything like that. And then you have that type of situation, or you have a situation where now there's two people that are really dealing with a lot of pain. They've medicated it in different ways. Both ways have hurt the other person, and now they're trying to figure out a way to reconcile. So I think the difference a little bit is in when you have a betrayed partner that wouldn't be engaging in those types of behaviors, that, I was the one like setting all the boundaries and communicating and setting up the structure. I think if there were two people dealing with different forms of addiction, that there may be in some ways, now they would be different, but in some ways there may be boundaries that need to be set on both sides, support, accountability, those types of things that go bi-directionally to some extent, where you're sort of like helping each other through the process. But whatever the wounding is from both sides is where the other boundaries are going to come in. And those are going to be different per person depending on how that manifested in the relationship. Right. So I think that's where working with practitioners can help you be really specific to your situation, because it would be more complex and it would be much more unique, I think, and add a layer, because the betrayed partner is going to have so many emotions just from being the betrayed partner. If you're also dealing with tendencies toward addictive patterns yourself, there's already other layers there that are going to make it more complicated and more emotional and more complex. And so my initial thought, like with this kind of thing, is that you really, really emphasize in these situations the work for each individual to do deep healing.
Absolutely.
And then maybe do like a deep focus on how are we going to safely communicate in empathetic, honest, and vulnerable ways, and how are we going to mutually commit to a process where we're both committing to do this because we're both dealing with really hard things. Even if it's not like simultaneous, like if maybe there's an addiction that has, maybe one partner has been sober longer than another, right? There's probably not usually a situation where it's like identical in terms of like,
time frame is
the same. So I think, so when I'm thinking about, what do you do in a situation like that and the layers of complexity, I'm thinking, well, there's definitely going to have to be a strong emphasis that both individuals are making sure that they are really in tune with their own stuff. All the things that we typically talk about with the pornography addict would then apply also to the betrayed partner in terms of making sure you're aware of your emotions, making sure you have healthy outlets for them, making sure you know how to communicate them. And then in addition, and processing all of that with a therapist and a practitioner and continuing to do that deep work. So you, in your recovery journey, get more and more strong. And then your partner in their recovery journey gets more and more strong. And then together, it's like, okay, how are we going to navigate this in the household situation? How are we going to navigate this relationally? And how are we going to communicate to each other in safe ways, knowing that we both have this struggle?
Yeah, I think of maybe two risks there. One would be being so empathetic that you don't put boundaries because you understand what it's like to have an addiction, right?
Yeah, for sure.
You go, man, why would I say anything? Because I know what it's like to be kind of out of control or in a compulsive mindset. So I think that's a risk you run, and so the thing I would say on that is, addicts need help. People engaged in compulsive behavior always need help, and who better to help them than the person in the house, right? The person that you're married to or that you're with. I think the other risk, could be doing this back and forth where it's like, well, you've got to fix yours as opposed, like constantly throwing it back on the other partner and not really engaging in your own healing. But, maybe a more, and this is going to be hard to do, but maybe a more of a, hey, I need help and I'm going to help you. And together we're going to be able to move through this, together. Because, I think, resentment is one of those things that can build as your compulsive behavior goes away. That's actually one of the the readings, the emotions that come out on the faster scale. So I think that would be the big caution is watch out for resentment in there, because it'll be like, well, I would have never done this, or why are you on my case because you have this problem? Like recognize they are what they are. They both exist and they both can exist.
Yeah.
And so,
when I think in a situation like this, like too, when what comes to my mind is there's obviously a lot of pain. There's a lot of pain individually that it's manifested this way in both lives. And there's a lot of pain probably relationally, because navigating these processes together is not easy with one addiction, much less two. So just we sometimes will talk about the addict partner really, really needing to take responsibility to empathize with the betrayed partner, right? And I can see in situations like this how it would be confusing, because one person's feeling betrayed and then maybe there's some wounded emotions on the other person's part as they navigated the other addiction, right? And so I think we all every human, you said addicts need help, people that have compulsive behavior, humans need help. We all need help.
Yeah.
This is like everything that we talk about in terms of relational health and emotional health is like a human thing. It's not, we put it in Recover You and we talk about addiction and betrayal, but it's really just humans. Like the processes that we talk about are just for humans. And so we all need help. And I think in a situation like this, it would really be both people all people, all humans again, but both people in the relationship need to take responsibility for whatever has been unmanaged in their own life in an unhealthy way, and any impact that has had on the other partner.
Right.
And so that would really have to go bi-directionally. And I can see how, as a betrayed partner, if I was currently working through the betrayal, how that would make me feel kind of prickly in some ways because I know at the beginning, going through what we went through, I was like, this is your issue and don't put any of it on me, which, yeah, it's not my fault. But over time, like, if I had been dealing with something like, a food addiction or something of that nature, I would, through this process, really need to say, hey, if I expect you to take responsibility and have empathy on my pain, I'm going to have to take responsibility and have empathy on your pain as well. And I think that's something that's really, really important. Anything we ask the other person to do, we need to be willing to do ourselves when it comes to honesty, vulnerability, taking responsibility, integrity, like empathy, all of these things. Like, we have to, as the betrayed partner, be willing to work through our own stuff enough too that we reciprocate in, health. And so anything that I asked you to do, obviously I didn't have to like put blockers on my phone because I don't look at pornography. But if I had an issue, like, yeah, right? Like, if I don't want you to be looking at it, I shouldn't be looking at it. If I don't want you, so the rules for fidelity apply to me the same way they apply to you. If I'm asking you to be empathetic towards me and there has been a legitimate situation where I have hurt you, I need to be empathetic towards you. And I think the thing too that's always important, again, this is humanity, not just addiction and betrayal, is we all individually need to be careful not to play the victim. There are victims, absolutely. And there are perpetrators and victims, and we kind of talk about that power dynamic as we navigate recovery and stuff like that. But as an individual, as the victim, we want to be careful not to live in that state. We want to make sure that we go, hey, this thing has happened to me. It did make me a victim. It was painful. It is horrible. But the way we live life in a healthy way is we have absolutely no control over the fact that this thing happened.
Right.
So what can we do about it?
Yeah.
And that's where, okay, what action am I going to take? Am I going to stay in this relationship? If we're going to stay in this relationship, then we need to work on relational health. We need to work on communication. We need to work on vulnerability. We need to work on healing. We need to work on all these things. If we're, we really need to do that individually, even if we're not going to stay in the relationship. But we really can only take control of our own lives. And so making sure that we are showing up and hitting the bar that we expect our partner to hit. Are we a person of integrity? Are we a person that is empathetic? Are we a person that is strong in their own boundaries? Are we a person that is living in alignment? We have to be careful with that, because I think sometimes as a valid victim, someone who has been very wounded, sometimes it can be easy for us to throw things on you as a person who's hurt us, and like I'm going to over justify some of my behavior or some of my thinking because of the pain that I'm in, without ever kind of holding myself in check and going, wait a second, maybe I need some deeper healing at this point. So, we kind of talk about that when we talk about anger, right? Like there's a time and a place for anger. There's righteous anger. It's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's fine to show your partner that you're upset. And if this is something that goes on for like 2 years, then there's a deeper thing that like I have to take responsibility for the fact that that's not resolved, right? So things like that. And that's where I'm saying like these answers are complicated, because how does this manifest in a relationship? If there were two people that were wounded enough to have compulsive patterns and have enough trauma that they manifest in addiction, there's going to be so many complexities to that relationship that there's no way I can anticipate like what all of those would look like and how people communicate and what the wounds are. So that's where I think it's just really important to go, okay, how am I showing up in the world? What is my pain? What is my responsibility? How do I heal? And then what are the boundaries I need to feel safe with my partner, and vice versa? Yeah.
Gabor Mate says, don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. And so I think when you think about somebody who's got their own compulsive behavior, when the discovery of a pornography addiction or affairs or whatever, is everybody's pain is going to go up. Everybody's pain goes up, right? So the addict, as he's trying to work through recovery and this, maybe the coping pattern is gone, and then the spouse who's got a let's say an unhealthy coping pattern is the pain is up at that point. So what pain existed that contributed to it, now all of a sudden it's
now here's another question
multiplied.
That just popped into my head. What if the betrayed partner's addiction was a trauma response to like the betrayal?
Oh yeah,
right. You know what I'm saying? So like I don't know.
Yeah.
There's so many layers that this could potentially be.
But I think what happens is, like, we all deserve to live the best version of ourselves, right? And so nobody's going to judge anybody that finds out that their husband has been having multiple affairs, or activity that I did, that goes and opens up a bottle of wine and, like, let's say drinks a little bit too much that night. But at some point, I think we're intuitively smart as human beings. We understand when something is just a one-time reaction to, hey, this coping mechanism has now become unhealthy and a problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think the answer to that one is it's very complex.
It is very complex. Yeah.
And I will say too, we always want to give permission for this. You can have two really wonderful people, and there are things that can happen in a relationship that make it so complex that working it out together isn't feasible.
Right.
And that doesn't mean that you guys have failed. It doesn't mean that you're bad people.
Mm-hmm.
There's always the possibility that really getting into your own sobriety and your own deep, deep healing means that you have to do it without that person, just because there's so much relational baggage maybe at that point. Mm-hmm. Or there's some situations where maybe because you have a shared history of similar and you do have that deeper understanding together, you can become really strong and help each other in sobriety and really push each other to get in the deepest recovery ever and have an amazing relationship. So I think, both are totally viable depending on how the couple would be able to interact and support each other.
Yeah.
Okay, so the second question would be a little similar, but maybe slightly different. And that is, what if my partner has also had an affair in the past? So we have, like, let's say the betrayed partner has a spouse who has like an addiction. So it's a chronic thing. And then, but at the same time, maybe the betrayed partner has maybe had like a short affair, and it was like 5 years ago, for example.
Well,
and they've quote unquote moved past it.
Yeah,
right?
I would say it doesn't sound like the healing has happened. You know what I mean? So let's say that talking about resentment, I mentioned resentment earlier. I think that's a very common emotion that can happen after somebody has betrayed you. So you carried that. So did the new addict or the new affair guy or whatever, did he really, really fully heal as a couple? Did they go through that? Did they, one doesn't justify the other. It's not like, okay, you're going to have an affair. Well, I'm going to have an affair. Oh yeah. Well, if you're going to have another affair, I'll have an affair. And then you just keep, that's toxic, and you don't want to do that. So I once again, I think the answer to that would be, it depends. Because I've said this before, like I would, if you ended up having an affair, which I don't think you would, but if you did, I would be very, very understanding. And then I think it would also depend on how you approached me after that affair. If you were like, well, the heck with you, and you were like, let's say, it's hard to describe it, but let's say you were mean and you were doing it to rub it in my face. Well, then that relationship no longer has it's a revenge thing, and that's not healthy either, right? So, once again, I think I've always said this to you. I would very much understand if something happened or you did something, and who would I be to take this high road with you, right? In light of what I did.
You use the word resentment. I can see how in situations like this, and even the question that we were talking about earlier, like with co-addicts or not co-addicts, but like two addicts or a previous affair, how healthy relationship, really deep, healthy relationship requires vulnerability. And when you are in a relationship where, let's say, there's unresolved stuff that's been unresolved for a long period of time and it was never fully resolved, it's like walking with those rocks in your shoes kind of deal. the resentment is a good word. I think also a lot of like armor is going to be up. And so navigating a new pain or a new discovery or something when all of this history is there, it's going to add complexity to that. Because if you have two people that haven't been communicating on a deep, vulnerable level, and to your point, maybe it wasn't fully healed, and then this comes up, it's just piling on to the pile of pain that's actually not really been dealt with, right? So I think that is where, when I think about what's going to cause problems for people in reconciliation, it is for both individuals. The more armor that is up in your communication, the less effective it's going to be. But really, if even only one person cannot put down their armor, then it's going to be kind of a futile point in trying to have conversations. Because if the person that has the armor up cannot receive vulnerability and honesty and apologies or whatever it is, then it's going to be very difficult to ever get any movement in the area of healing in the relationship. Now, like I said, even I just mentioned it like a minute ago with anger and stuff, like there's a time and a place, right? It's not like you find something out day one and all of a sudden you're sitting down and going, let me listen to your pain. That's not what I'm talking about.
Shocking and
right. Yeah. That's not what I'm trying to say. But it's in general, when couples will have patterns. Every couple has patterns, and a lot of couples will have communication patterns. And a lot of times what you'll end up kind of seeing is survival patterns. I know how to manage, but we're not actually thriving. We're not creating enough space for connection. We're not actually addressing the things that are really, really uncomfortable. In fact, a lot of times the survival pattern is to avoid that or manage it in a way where it's like, we sort of feel like we've talked about it, but not to the point that it's resolved. So it's like you see a lot of these patterns relationally where there's a lot of avoidance in the coupleship about hard things. So those hard things are never completely resolved. And we've shared this, but if you're maybe a new listener, we've shared how like sometimes the conversations that we have to really work things out are hours long. And I always encourage couples, like, you've got to prioritize communication over like really everything else, because you have to get into the brain of your partner and they have to get into your brain, and you really have to understand and see each other. And again, sometimes there may be times where one person has so much armor on that's impossible. And you realize this is futile because they're so defensive. I cannot be seen. They cannot hear me. They cannot empathize with me. And then that's, you're going to have to make a decision how long you can tolerate that, or if you want to be in that relationship anymore, or if they're going to want to resolve that at all or do any healing. But if in healthy relationships, there's a point at which both people work on the pain to the point that they experiment with being vulnerable. Is it safe to be vulnerable with this person? And that's where you end up having these conversations where, like in last week's podcast, we were sharing, I was like, I felt like in the middle of it, I needed to tell people we're not getting divorced. But the fact that we can talk about those things very, very openly about if grief comes up, or like, well, do you feel like you could be in a relationship with someone else and feel differently? Or, all of these things, like, you have to have so much safety and connection and vulnerability in a relationship to know that no matter what I think or feel, like it's talk outable. We can talk about it. Right. And so I think when you're thinking about, okay, we have an affair in the past, we have an addiction in the present, again, similar to the first question, we're talking about two people that have a lot of pain.
Right.
And relationally, we probably have a lot that is built up at this point in terms of resentment, a lot of armor, a lot of communication defenses, where neither person in some cases may be willing to be completely vulnerable because they don't feel safe with the other person, because now both of them feel hurt.
Yeah, I think, scorekeeping is not a good way to have a relationship. And so, like there are, and that, a reactive affair to, let's say, addiction or whatever, while understandable, is not really a great thing to do.
Well, it's not healthy. We're always trying to think about, healthy, okay, what is healthy? Like, how do we move towards health?
Yeah. But I think to your point, because like through a lot of our recovery pathway, you wanted attention. And you really wanted it from me. And because of my recovery and I had to really heal my wounds and how I was approaching life, I wasn't always fully capable of giving you that. And so through the years, you would say, hey, I really want to be paid attention to. I really want to. And to your credit, you were communicating that to me.
I'd be like, just to be honest, there's part of me that really wants to dress up and go to a bar and get hit on.
That's right. And
I'm sorry to tell you that, but I would like some affirmation. And because you feel lonely through this process sometimes when you're not feeling connected to your partner.
Right. And so,
but I was like, I'm not going to do that because I know it's not the right thing to do.
Well, and I would struggle because, in my shame, I'd be like, well, she should go do that. And, why don't you go do that? And of course, that wouldn't have been helpful, either. But it's like, it also gave me a chance to think through my own, like, okay, what's going on in my head that's not allowing me to, give you affirmation? And then even the broader question is, are you receiving the affirmation I'm giving you?
Right.
Because that was part of that as well.
Yeah. Well, so you had to do the self-reflection to go, okay, how can I connect with her more? Because obviously there's something missing. But that me feeling that way is also an opportunity to go, why do I feel this way? And how can I continue healing myself so I don't feel this way? Because either there's something in myself to work on or in the relationship to work on so that we can feel more connected. And then that piece goes away. So it's not like, oh, I feel this way, I'm totally valid in feeling this way, I'm going to go do it, right? This is information and I kind of need to figure it out one way or another.
Right.
And so, I think I think it's, we're dealing with humans and humans are complicated.
They are.
Every situation is going to be a little different. And we're talking about more complex situations in this episode. And so it's like, we always, I talk about boundaries are something that we have to set for our own safety, for our own health, and it has to do with our behavior in response to somebody else's unhealthy behavior. We're asking them to come into health, and when they choose not to respond to that, then we have to. So then if we're going to do things like that, we have to make sure that we are living into health, that we are engaging in healthy behaviors and moving towards health ourselves. And so we can only be responsible for the choices that we make, and part of the choices that we make are what choices do we make in response to how other people treat us, right? And so really in a relationship, it should be both people doing that. I'm going to take full responsibility for how I show up, how I communicate to my partner, for my level of integrity in this relationship. And if I hurt you in some way, I'm going to take responsibility for that. But, I'm going to keep working on my own stuff. And if you cross some boundaries, I'm going to respond to that to keep myself moving towards health. And vice versa. Like you should do the same thing. Also, I think being sensitive to, again, who's done what and where the wounds are. And as we move towards health, we should become more and more familiar with how we think about things.
And
how we feel about things.
I was thinking as you're talking, like fidelity and health are not conditional. And so, those are things that you have the option to be as healthy as you can be. You have the option to be as faithful as you can be. You have the option to really work on yourself as much as you can. Like it's not, man, I would have really gone to therapy if you hadn't been an alcoholic. Like that doesn't make any sense, right? Like work on your wounds. Don't conditionally tie those to your spouse's behavior.
Well, I think sometimes when there's been an affair, so let's say there was an affair like 5 years ago and it was like a short-lived thing, and then the couple, quote unquote, worked through it, and then now there's an addiction in the background and it's like betrayal all over, but opposite direction, right? Things like this can be really difficult because a lot, like when there's so many times where people come into the addiction recovery and they realize, oh, wow, there's like so much more in terms of reconciliation and emotional health and work than we knew about when this original event happened.
Right.
And so I think it's fair to say, hey, like if there's still residual pain there, if this did not feel resolved and you have new tools, it's okay to still talk about that, because you might be going through as the betrayed partner today what your partner went through as a betrayed partner 10 years ago. And it's totally valid for you to move through these and to share your emotions and stuff. At some point, there may be a need to revisit and give them permission to fully express their pain around that and go through the same kind of process where you are hearing each other and making sure that, the wounds given each other are fully expressed in a safe way.
Yeah.
And so I think it's, just because it happened in the past doesn't mean, if it hasn't been resolved, doesn't mean that we can't revisit it and do better at healing it this time. Anything else around that thought?
Nope.
Yeah, that would be complicated. That would be really, really
It would
hard.
be hard, yeah.
And I think, again, it's the same thing. It's sometimes situations like that may lead someone to have more compassion and empathy and understanding, but other times it may also create a situation where there's so many defenses up and so much pain that you just get to the point where you go, I don't know if I can be ever fully vulnerable with this person anymore, just because there's so much stuff under the bridge at this point, or there's like a mountain of pain built up. And so what do we do about it?
Yeah.
So that, those are complicated questions that would be very individual to the.
Yeah, it's very much hey, we just keep hurting each other. What's this about? Yeah.
Okay, third question, last question. What if the betrayed partner has looked at porn themselves?
So I would, there's a difference between compulsive porn use and a curiosity, a accidental exposure. They're very different. And this is actually one of the things that I've reflected on. So I'm like, when they were like, yeah, you get exposed at an early age, I'm like, was I the only one that got exposed at an early age? And then it started to hit me. I'm like, no, you can almost guarantee that probably everybody's been exposed in some way, right? Depends on what it is. But people do different things with that, right? Unfortunately for me, I became an addict, right? But that's not everyone's story. So that doesn't mean that everybody has to go through something. Now, I would say that if if you've lied about that, so like if I said to you, hey, have you ever looked at pornography? And let's say you had, and you said, no, I haven't. Well, then now you've lied to me. So that's a lie. It's not, now you don't have to go through 10 lessons of Conquer. We got to figure out why you lied to me, right? And so I think it really centers around what is the impact and how honest are you being with your partner.
Oh, for sure. Because there's a huge difference between someone who's like, I've looked at it a handful of times, I felt guilty, and I told my partner every single time.
Right. And
someone who is secretively living a second life, hiding it from you, lying around it, manipulating you around it, and you have no idea that this is happening in the background. Those are like very, very different things. Now, what needs to happen in every relationship is there needs to be clarity around what is and is not okay in your relationship. Like, is pornography acceptable to you guys in any level, in any form, whether you know about it or are honest about it or not? Is that okay both directions? Because if it may not be an addiction, but if it's something that you're engaging in and your partner's not okay with it, then we still need to take responsibility for that. And whatever we need to do, maybe a blocker is enough in that situation, or maybe check-ins are enough in that situation, or whatever it is. Maybe it's not a full-blown addiction level process, but just checking in and being like, well, what drew me to do that in the first place? What drew me to do it back the second time or the third time or the fourth time? Like, what was my motivation there? And do I need to take any steps around that to never do it again if this is not something that, and we would personally recommend you don't do it again.
Yeah.
We don't find there to be any value or any health in it.
Redeeming quality.
But the biggest thing, but in a coupleship, is really this idea of honesty. And so there's a huge difference between someone. So my point with that is like, you don't want to have an addict partner going, well, you've looked at it too.
Yeah.
Like, okay, no. Chronic, compulsive, manipulative, lying behavior is very different from I made a mistake and I told you about it, and it's not a compulsive, addictive pattern.
Well, that goes to the root where you hear a lot of betrayed partners go, I didn't like the pornography, but what I really didn't like was the lying and manipulation.
For sure.
You know what I mean? And so it's like that, why would you do that? Just tell me. I would have helped you, you know what I mean? And stuff like that. That's probably how you felt. You're like, I would have helped you. I would have been mad. I would have been all of those things. But man, I would have helped you if you had just been honest. And so, yeah, I think there's a, the way our society is today, you can argue there's even probably things on TV that are borderline pornography, right? Now with just normal shows that you have to kind of guard against, and stuff like that. And so I think it's a really, it is about honesty. It is about what it's doing, you know, or
And I think, you know, for women or for partners or for individuals who have occasionally looked at pornography, I think you should go through an assessment, like a personal assessment, just like we would ask an addict to do for a relapse. Like, I think it's fair to say, why don't you spend some time thinking about why? And like, if it was more than a one-time thing, how did it make you feel? What was the environmental situation? Were you lonely? Were you bored? Were you feeling disconnected, like from life or from your partner or whatever? And that's never to blame the partner, because it's not that's not what I'm saying. But like recognizing the feelings within yourself that then, you know, in your own mind justified that out as an outlet that time. So it's really, I think it's fair to say, hey, like if we expect our addict partner to do all this work, and I'm not an addict, but I've been exposed or I've chosen to do this occasionally, like I'm going to need to do some self-reflection and make sure that that's in check. Because if I want them to hit this standard, I need to make sure I'm hitting the same standard. And that goes back to my point of like, as a couple, we need to make sure that we're very, very clear on what our definition of fidelity is, what our definition of infidelity is, what is and is not acceptable in our relationship, and that we agree on this.
Yeah.
And if we don't agree, that there are some boundaries or expectations set, because whatever the for lack of a better term, the more conservative couple in this area, or the more conservative individual would be, that's kind of where the line needs to be set, right? Like, so if one person's like no pornography at all, and someone's like, well, I don't care if you tell me, then you're really going to have to agree to no pornography.
Yeah,
you're going to have to go towards the safest.
It can get very confusing then in a particular thing. So like,
and I think in a situation like that, if you're like, well, I'm fine if she tells me, and she's like, well, I don't want you to do it at all, and you're like, well, that's not fair. If you're having trouble giving something up in a relationship that's like pornography or something that's, you know, like that, that's going to beg the question, why is that a difficult choice for you over the safety of your relationship? Right. So it should always be an easy choice to choose the safety of the relationship over something that brings temporary dopamine hits.
Well, you know, relationships thrive, and you've always said this, that you always feel the best when we're on the same page, when you feel like we're on the same page. And so when there's alignment in a relationship as to, you know, what direction you're moving in, what choices you're making, that sort of thing, it's a really powerful and safe and comforting place to be in. And so I think that's what's part of this particular question, is like, hey, is there alignment there?
Yeah.
You know, and alignment on honesty, alignment on the lack of manipulation. Is there alignment on, you know, the reasons,
the direction we're heading?
Yeah, right.
You know, what we're agreeing to do or not do in the future around these things, the level of accountability we're willing to both have around these things.
Right.
And again, I don't want to throw somebody who's, you know, just occasionally, who doesn't have a problem, I don't want to throw them into the pile of, you know, the work that an addict has to do. Right. But we, you know, again, any standard that we want to hold our partner to, we have to be willing to hit as well when it comes to honesty, integrity, and fidelity.
That's right.
So we have to make sure that we are committing to that too. But these are conversations that I think every couple should have, is like, how do we define fidelity? What do we think about pornography? What do we think about masturbation? What do we think about masturbation without pornography? What do we think about masturbation with fantasy? What if I'm fantasizing about you? What if, you know, do you need to know? Do you need to not know? Do you want me to tell you if I, you know, all these things, like especially after addiction or infidelity of some sort or betrayal of some sort, like conversations have to go to that level, because otherwise you have all these unanswered questions in the back of your mind where you're like, well, what are they doing when they go on this business trip? Or what are you doing when you're home alone? Or, you know, are you XYZ? Or like, am I comfortable with this? Or do I need to look at their phone? Or like hypervigilance will stay there if we don't talk about it more and more and more and more and more and more. Yeah. And I think too, like that question, you know, what if the betrayed partner has also looked at pornography? I think it's like, you could almost reword that in a way to be like, what if the betrayed partner has made mistakes or has hurt their partner in some way? Like the betrayed partner has inevitably, whether they've yelled at their partner, whether they've said mean things, whether they've done something hurtful, they've inevitably, like I at some point did something that hurt your feelings. I'm sure. Never ever, right?
I've got a list.
I hope not. So, right, like there's always going to be something, right? And your addiction needed to be separated from anything that would have been there, right? So like my point is like when all this came out, if you were like, yeah, but in 2020 you did this and you really upset me on Christmas Day because you didn't like the present I gave you, or, whatever, something like that. I think sometimes that happens, and we can have these relational patterns, or we can have this, what did you call it earlier? This, when you're like holding it against people.
Resentment. Oh, scorekeeping.
Scorekeeping, yeah. So you can have this scorekeeping pattern in relationships sometimes. And it's like, I think one thing that an addict really has to recognize is this is a separate issue and you cannot mix the two. Right. You have to take responsibility for your stuff, and we can deal with these other things separately, but they need to be kept separate. You cannot be going, well, if we didn't, if we got along better, like I wouldn't be an addict. Like they are different. They are totally different things. And they have to be separated. And part of the reason I say that is because sometimes I think sometimes addicts want to like lump all of the relational stuff into the addiction, almost as qualifying why they had the addiction. And
that's the lack of taking responsibility.
Right. And and then they use that to say, well, my betrayed partner needs to somehow take responsibility in my behavior for this. And I can't be taking all the responsibility. And it's like, no, you absolutely can. And you should. You absolutely can, and you should, because you've hurt somebody, and you have to
heal quicker.
Yeah, you've hurt somebody, and you have to take responsibility for that. Now, do we have communication patterns that need to be worked out? Maybe behind the scenes that are separate from this. Absolutely. Do we have other wounds that maybe have happened in the relationship that need to be addressed? Absolutely. But they're separate issues. And when you mix the two of them, there's extreme confusion and pain on the betrayed partner's part. And it really basically halts the healing, because until you can take responsibility and empathize and apologize for your part and for your behavior, flat out, it's your behavior. If you can't apologize for that and take full responsibility for that, then the betrayed partner is not feeling seen. They're feeling blamed. And that's not going to go well for reconciliation. So I see this pattern sometimes. The betrayed partner, they want to self-reflect. They want to take responsibility. They want to work on communication. They want to connect with their partner, all these kinds of things. But maybe their marriage has struggled in certain ways. Maybe there have been conflicts. Maybe there has been different pain points. And they're like, I want to make sure that I take responsibility for this, right? And I want to make sure that I'm working on this. And that's good. And we should. And it can't get mixed up into the fact that somebody has chosen to step out of the relationship in a way that is defined as infidelity, that has broken you, and that has nothing to do with you. It's so totally about their own pain and how they have chosen to deal with their pain. And those are separate issues. They both need to be addressed, but they are separate issues. So for the addict has to recognize that. You can have a lot of pain that you're carrying about your relationship. That's separate. You still have to apologize and take responsibility for what you've done.
Right.
Period.
Absolutely.
Like there's really no exception to that rule. I just see so often when that can't happen, or when people are struggling with that part, that it just the relational healing goes nowhere.
Well, I also think too, like it as people in recovery brain, or as they're gaining some sense of sobriety, or they're recognizing that their patterns of behavior have hurt people, whatever those patterns of behavior are, people will cling to some sense of normalcy, and they won't, you start to heal when you really kind of come to the end of putting up these walls. That's when you let your guard down entirely, then you can allow the community to come in and start to heal you. And so to your point, I mean, you're like, did you hurt me? Well, sure, but I hurt you in some of those relationships too before you knew about my addiction, because that's what human beings do to each other when they're in relationship. And, some hurt more than others and stuff like that. But, that's why they always say, you get wounded in community, but you heal in community. Right. And so, that's just what happens. We end up, of course, there was things that probably I didn't take very well, but I wasn't very good at processing through those things either, because the addiction was present, right? So it took away my range of motion.
And I think some people too would say, oh, those things contributed to the reason I was in the addiction, because you did this, I felt this way, and then I internalized it, and then this was part of and it's still separate.
It's a pattern. It was a pattern. Yeah.
It's still separate, because yes, that relational dynamic may have happened. Maybe that argument happened. Maybe that pain point happened, but it was still, the lack of I'm not going to address this here in a healthy way. I'm going to go medicate it over here.
Right.
And so that's still a separate issue.
Absolutely.
You can have the relational stuff that you need to work on 100%. And we still have to take responsibility for the fact that this manifested in this way that has now just like flattened the relationship completely.
Right.
So it's just really, really important, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else about any of those questions?
No, I think, the
It's
last,
complex.
the last thing I would just say is, hey, work on yourself. Really work on yourself. And there's a lot of resources out there for you, and you deserve to heal. And yes, people hurt you, and that's how addictions, present, and that's how anger comes about, and that's how shopping addictions come about, and all those things. Yeah, absolutely.
And we're all responsible for how we respond to the painful things that happen in our life, regardless of who made the painful thing happen or who did the painful thing. We are responsible for how we respond to it.
Yeah.
And hopefully that response is, I'm going to take responsibility for my response, whatever that may be, and I'm going to go work through the pain that I am feeling so that I can show up in a more present way. And that is every single human, whether you're the addict or the betrayed partner. I think that's the summary. If we had to like everything that we talked about, right, is all humans should be analyzing what are the pain points in my life and how can I begin to work through them so that I don't have unhealthy responses and so that other people's behaviors don't create unhealthy responses, or I don't create unhealthy responses from the pain caused by those interactions.
Right.
So it's like it might be a good exercise after this episode to sit down and be like, what are the top 5 things in my life that get me a little activated? What causes me anxiety? What triggers me emotionally? What brings up a little bit of anger in me? What are the things that are like the most likely to make me, feel this way?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then those are the things that, okay, let's take this list to our therapist. Let's take this list to our coach and let's go, okay, I'm ready to deal with this.
Let's delete social media.
Let's delete social media oh my gosh, for real. Yeah. Don't watch the news. Don't listen. Yeah, I agree. But then, okay, so now we've identified these things. Let's go learn, how do I respond? How do I support my body? How do I support my nervous system? How do I heal these triggers and process these wounds so that I can be more calm and more grounded? So Patrick, you can sit over there and be in a rage at me and I can not take it personally.
I'm in a rage right now.
Yeah. But it's like that ability to separate to some extent, still hold your human value and know your worth and your value, be able to set boundaries and then be able to go. And I feel really, really good about that and in integrity with that because I'm also challenging myself and focusing on the areas that I need to work on as well.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
No, that's it.
Great. Well, like we said, I think this is complex. So I hope that this episode was helpful. This was diving into some territory that maybe we don't usually dive into a little bit and is a little bit new. So like I said, I don't think we probably hit every aspect of, every angle that could happen in these situations, but hopefully we were able to share some thoughts that maybe resonated with you, and we hope that it was helpful. Every day is a new opportunity to choose health and freedom. Make that choice today, and we will see you next week. Woohoo! If you're listening to this, it means you've made it through an entire episode. Part of recovery is spending time engaging in healing and self-growth activities. We are thankful that you chose our podcast to be one of those activities today. Make sure you reward yourself for that accomplishment. If you've enjoyed this episode or this podcast, we would love to hear from you. Please take just a few moments to leave a rating and review, letting us know your experience with Recover You. We not only love hearing how these episodes are helpful, but ratings and reviews help others just like you who are searching for recovery information and support find the podcast too. We can't wait to hear from you. See you next week.